Thank you for returning again to the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking at day 93 for Thursday, April 2nd, 2020, focusing on 2 Samuel chapters 8 through 11. So we will see the arc of the rise of God's king, the cresting of that, and the culmination of the rise of God's king. We'll see some beautiful things, but also see some challenges that come along with that too today. In 2 Samuel 8, I will go briefly over this. It's that we see that that King David has just been blessed by God to have his descendants sit on an everlasting throne. So King David goes out to war, and he fights with the Philistines, the Moabites, the Arameans, and the Edomites. And it says in 2 Samuel 8, verse 6, the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. So we see King David grows wealthy from the spoils and tributes given by these other countries. And this is still with proper respect to God and to people. It says in 2 Samuel 8:15, David administered justice and equity to all his people. Things are going really well. And as I mentioned last time, David shows kindness to a son of Jonathan named Mephibosheth. In 2 Samuel 9:3, the king said, "Is there anyone remaining of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" Ziba, one of the attendants who had been with King Saul, said to the king, "There remains a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet." David summons Mephibosheth to him and says to the crippled man, David says to him in verse 7, "Do not be afraid, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you yourself shall eat at my table always." He did obeisance and said, "What is your servant, that you should look upon a dead dog such as I?" Mephibosheth, the one who feels ashamed because he knows that he is crippled. He has unresponsive legs. He thinks his value is connected to his physical attributes. Yet he sees no reason why King David should honor him. David extends kindness to him because David knows his own humble beginnings. He remembers that he was a shepherd boy. They're the youngest of his sons, of Jesse's sons. And he knows that the Lord can bless anybody. Additionally, King David promised to keep Jonathan's request made in 1 Samuel 20, verse 13. "May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me faithful love of the Lord. But if I die, never cut off your faithful love from my house. Even if the Lord were to cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." So all the enemies of David are being cut down, and a lot of peace is being extended. And he promised to Jonathan that he would keep his descendants around and bless them. And so David's love for Jonathan and his desire to keep his covenant will be shown through his love for Mephibosheth. As we see at the end of chapter 9, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he always ate at the king's table. I hope that you can learn from that and that you may find a way to honor those that you have loved, even as they might be physically removed from you. So we give thanks for the gift of love here. Moving on to 2 Samuel 10, we see the Ammonites have a change in leadership when their son inherits the throne, and King David sends a group of men to offer consolation to the Ammonites, which is received not with gratitude, but with suspicion. 2 Samuel 10:3 says, Do you really think that David is honoring your father just because he has sent messengers with condolences to you? Has not David sent his envoys to you to search the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it? With malice in his heart, being deceived, King Hanun of the Ammonites dishonors David's men. It says in chapter 10, verse 4, "So Hanun seized David's envoys and shaved off half of the beard of each, and cut off their garments in the middle at their hips, and sent them away." So the idea is that the men are left half naked. And from this, they are ashamed. They become traveling in shame. King David is rightly upset, and seeing he went too far, the Ammonites gather allies to fight the Israelites. So mercenary Arameans, the king of Maacah, and the men of Tob gather on one side to fight the Israelites, while the Ammonites sandwich them on the other side. The surrounded Israelites release control to God, saying in 2 Samuel 10:12, "Be strong, and let us be courageous for the sake of our people, and for the cities of our God, and may the Lord do what seems good to him." Thus the Israelites fight on both sides and are victorious on both fronts. The Arameans retreat and gather again, and King David then brings more forces from Jerusalem as reinforcements. The Israelites again defeat the Arameans and make them subject to them, and the Arameans learn and are afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. Now we get to the pinnacle here of everything in 2 Samuel 11. With all the successes of Joab leading the Israelite army, King David decides, I'm going to take it easy. I am going to relax in Jerusalem. I'm going to enjoy a little bit of this life. And he looks out across Jerusalem, the city formerly known as Jebus, which he conquered and then made his capital. He looks out from his house, which is higher up than other buildings, and sees the area around. He thinks to himself, and I imagine he reflects upon his success and power that he has come to enjoy, and maybe he feels that this is the high point of his life, the culmination of the rise of God's king. In many ways, it is, and because at this point we see the beginning of the fall of God's king. I say this because things go downhill fast due to King David's next series of actions. As King David is looking from his vantage point, he sees a woman bathing. And King David watches, sees her beauty, her nakedness, and his lust for Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, grows to the point where he takes action. King David objectifies Bathsheba, removes her from her home, and forces her to lay with him. King David sins. He thinks he can get away with it because he is king. He knows God sees all, yet thinks that his fellow humans will not notice. King David could get away with it until he realizes that Bathsheba is pregnant. And now, instead of admitting his sin, King David tries to hide it. David gives Uriah the Hittite leave from battle, hoping that he will lay with his wife and get her, think that he gets her pregnant. But instead, Uriah feels guilt that he gets a reprieve and his fellow brethren don't. He refrains from celebration in devotion to his God and his fellow soldiers, as it says in 2 Samuel 11:11. As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do such a thing. Uriah is honoring God. He's honoring his fellow soldiers. He's honoring the king even. Uriah is the model of doing what is right. which makes David even more clearly in the wrong. David tries again to get Uriah drunk and get him to go home, yet even under the influence of alcohol, Uriah does not trespass his morals. Things are then getting desperate for the king's cover-up plan. David then plots Uriah's death. The king orders his commander Joab to lead an aggressive charge against a city and then retreat, leaving Uriah behind to die at the hand of enemies. King David sends an elaborate plan and even stages a reaction for Joab to perform. In following orders, Joab executes the plan and thus executes Uriah. As an additional consequence, other innocent servants of David are killed. Thus, King David gets what he wants. Uriah is dead, and he gets to marry Bathsheba legally. Through this experience, I will point out a couple things that are pretty obvious. 1, power corrupts. God did not want a king for a reason. He didn't want the king to be in charge of God's people, to take that power for himself and to forget the fear of the Lord in his thinking that all the glory and success comes from his own hand. Second, is that even God's faithful David is a sinner. David does a lot right. David is a very righteous individual, righteous before God, seen as the greatest king over Israel of all time. And this king who establishes all these things for the kingdom of Israel, yet even he has flaws, and even he can be challenged away from following God. Which reminds us that anybody is a sinner. And third, lusting after and objectifying women leads to dysfunction. Women are due respect, especially in our day and time. It is right to treat women as humans as well. And our society, just like our societies before us, is prone to objectify women, treat them as sexual objects for males' desires. And if we learn anything from the Bible, it is that this leads to dysfunction, and when lust enters our hearts, that we have to be very careful with that. Like having sexual attraction is a good and healthy thing. It's a normal desire created by God. But acting upon that in ways that are unhealthy, right? That is when sexuality becomes unhealthy. And I should say as well too, like for different people, sexuality looks differently. And that, I do believe in fact that God can make people gay and create people who are, seek and pursue individuals of the same gender. But regardless of whatever you think about that, the reason I bring it up is because I want to say that sexuality for all people and all individuals needs to be taken very seriously. That our actions, especially in the realm of sex, have deep consequences, not just for pregnancy, but for the world around us. We will get more into that discussion of how our sexuality can impact the world around us, especially in ripples and effects and waves, when we look at the story next time in the Daily Bread Bible study for the consequences and the fall of God's King.